jer si milostivi čovekoljubiv Bog i tebi slavu uznosimo, Otcu i Sinu i Svetome Duhu, sada i uvek i u vekove vekova.
In a world of shadows and secrets untold, where primeval stories make the brave go cold, gods on high and realms below, whispers of legends that shape each soul. And nightmarish dreams, cryptids lurking, nothing's as it seems, giants walking, angels and demons fight, only truth can bring the light. Through the echoes of time, the tales unfold, mysteries arise as the prophecies are foretold, from valiant knights to buried treasure, this podcast brings nothing but pleasure. Welcome to Myth, Mysteries and Majesty. Study with us, and don't be a travesty. Theology, mythology, fantasy, and horror. Dungeons and dragons, Skyrim and Mordor. And Mordor, powers haunt the evening, in gothic castles where they're screaming. Wizards cast spells in their towers tonight, exploiting enigmas hidden from our sight. Archaeologists make excavations deep of the ancient tombs where pharaohs sleep. In the dust of ages, we chronicles keep storytelling's power of monsters that creep. Myth, mysteries, and majesty is the place for you to learn about this haunted space. From scholarship to manuscripts of old, unlock the secrets of wisdom and gold.
Superman has been one of those favorite comic book characters in the hearts of many kids and even adults, not just for years, but for decades. When this latest movie came just recently, people were divided, saying it's one of the best Superman movies ever. Some of them saying it's almost garbage. I haven't seen it yet, so I cannot give my judgment yet. But still, over the years, so many people have said that they can see something like Judeo-Christian biblical narratives and character traits in Superman with some of the biblical characters, both in the Old Testament and with Jesus in the New Testament. So welcome to the episode 171, where we are welcoming Pastor Ben back to the episode, and where we will be assessing Superman, his character traits, his story, his background, his past, his mission, comparing all of that with Jesus, our Lord. Pastor Ben, how is everything with you? And welcome back.
Thanks for having me. It's been a while. Things are good. We discussed a little bit before the show. I'm preparing for a mission trip to Peru with my oldest son and our church, so we're excited to go there. I've always wanted to go to Peru. I don't know, maybe while I'm there, I'll find some elongated skulls or something. Yeah. No, things are going really well with me. The family's doing good. Everybody is healthy, and so I have no complaints whatsoever. But I'm excited for tonight's topic. Looking into this, any excuse to read comics, be like, oh, sorry, babe, I can't do that right now. I gotta do some research. Is perfect. So yeah, I'm excited. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
I actually love that. I think one day, if I marry, that would be a good excuse. Sorry, honey, I have to research. I have to, I'm forced to read this comic book. I'm forced to read this now. I hate it, but I have to because of the ministry purpose. Sorry, babe. You go and do this. So Pastor Ben and I will spend half of the episode comparing some of the attributes by using some of the articles, which I have included in the episode's description. And the other half will be dissecting this extremely good comic book called Kingdom Come. And as you can tell, has 400 pages. 300 pages are actually 4 chapters of the comic book. Both Pastor Ben and I had to read before this episode started. It's a really good comic. It's deeply religious. And the last 100 pages of the comic book are basically sketches and some extras. It's only $11 currently on Amazon. So do yourself a favor and buy it. I also included the link in this episode description, as well as Pastor Ben's podcast. So if you don't mind, please subscribe to our podcast and to Pastor Ben podcast. Pastor Ben, what do you love about Superman? If you can please give us some background, like especially when it comes to the Old Testament and biblical narratives, what do you think inspired the original authors when it comes to the biblical narrative and how Superman's character came to be?
Yeah, so it's really interesting, the parallels. I have to be careful because I don't want to say that Superman is a direct correlation to the Jewish Messiah or to Jesus, because I don't think that the original authors, I don't believe that was their intent, but they were, a couple of young adult, Jewish guys, many, many, many years ago, who first came up with the concept. And so as they were creating this man, they wanted it to really embody the virtues that they felt like, were super. And so he became this man who, in the original comics, he was older, he wasn't young. He was probably appear to be in his late 40s or early 50s. He couldn't really fly, but he could jump really high and far. And more often than not, it was his moral integrity and physical strength that allowed him to do good and to rescue and to save and to comfort people. And so, I think the parallels, while it's not one for one, I think just due to the fact of their Jewish upbringing, I think it bleeds over into the character. I don't think there's any way around it. And then later authors, who were Christians, picked up Superman, seeing those parallels, and made lots of references and connections to Jesus. And so as the character progresses, you do get to see more and more of a Messiah type figure throughout the comics. When I was young, I think like most young boys, born in the 80s, I was raised on Christopher Reeve's Superman. And Superman was great. It was truth, justice, and the American way. He was the iconic figure, even more so than Captain America back then, for everything that we were supposed to stand up for and be proud of. And so I just grew up loving Superman, loving everything about him, loved the fact that you could, slick your hair back and throw on glasses, and apparently nobody could tell who you were. It just is the fact that there's not phone booths anymore. That's the only thing that just really bums me out. You can't just run into a phone booth and change. But grew up loving Superman, and really now more than ever, what he has stood for traditionally and historically really resonates with me and kind of who I am and who I want to be.
So now you're super pastor. I think that's even cooler than Superman.
Hey. I need a cape. There we go.
You just keep your spandex suit in the locker, and because
yeah,
the trunk of your car, because like you said, there's no phone booths, or maybe in garage. So like whatever people need, you just dress up and here you come.
That's right.
Okay, so I think we can start with the first with the first article. Let's start with this one. Superman as Christ. So the guy here starts the article by comparing some of the movies that came out in the time when this article was written. So he mentions Superman Returns. He also mentions the whole franchise, Man of Steel. He mentions, he mentions some of the TV shows. And then he mentions about this soaring, so-called. I mean, one of the sayings in the movie, "Up, up and away," about Superman. Right. So it would basically make us look up. It would basically be a sign of hope, and in a way that we would look up to, in a way to Jesus, to God. We would here be almost quoting the psalmist. So our hope comes, when you look up to the mountains, your hope, your salvation comes up from above, right? So this article starts very nicely here, so that we can make this transition here from Jesus to Superman. And then he says, why heaven? Well, because Jesus Christ is there. And the Superman Returns draws some very interesting parallels between the Messiah and the Superman Returns. The Christian overtones begin early in the movie with the opening lines spoken by Jor-El to Superman, in which he says, and this is interesting, "You will travel far, my little Kal-El, but we will never leave you, even in the face of our deaths. You will make my strength your own. You will see my life through your eyes, as your life will be seen through mine. The Son becomes the Father, and the Father the Son." This shows Jor-El, father of Superman, to represent a godlike figure giving his powers to his only son, as God did to Jesus. And the part of his son becoming the Father and the Father becoming the Son is a staple to the Christians' belief that God is three entities: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Jor-El furthers this comparison with another quote by saying, "Live as one of them, Kal-El, to discover where your strength and your power are needed. Always hold in your heart the pride of your special heritage. They can be a great people, Kal-El. They wish to be. They only lack the light to show the way. For this reason, above all, their capacity for good, I have sent them you, my only son." Ooh, this is so good. I feel like we can preach the gospel the same way Pastor Ben, you and I several months ago did theology on the Silver Surfer. I feel like this is on the equal level, if not even bigger. I mean, here we're talking about Superman. So in a similar fashion where Jesus was incarnated, he came with a mission. He fulfilled his Father's will. He wasn't forced to come. He wanted to come. So yes, not perfect. It's not that the Superman story is perfectly copied here, because also Superman had to come here because of everything happening on his home planet. But here we see so many biblical parallels. The Son represents the Son, and the Father is in the Son, and the Son is coming in a sort of a rescue mission to help people see the light, follow the light, follow the way, by him showing this supreme moral compass that will guide them. And Jesus, as we know, didn't just come to morally lead people, but to lead them to salvation. But this is already so many nicely biblical parallels at the very get-go. What is your opinion on this?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you picked up on it. There's all these neat themes. Sorry if you hear some dogs barking in the background. So the creators were Jewish, and it seems like, Superman was really inspired by like Moses and Samson. I'm going to pause a second and go deal with those. I'll be right back. So sorry. That's going to be very...
That's fine. Okay, and I can continue talking about the rest of the article. So Superman was created 70 years ago by Jewish teens Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, who was a Canadian. And this is very interesting because what Pastor Ben covers now, it's actually what's also written in the article. It says, no doubt that they were thinking more of the original Moses than the new Moses, who is Jesus, when they dreamed up their iconic character. But the allusion to Moses is unmistakable in the Superman story. As their home planet Krypton is destroyed, Jor-El, Superman's father, and his wife Lara set their infant son Kal-El adrift, not on the river Nile, but into outer space, in the hopes that a good family on Earth will raise their son as one of their own, even though he's truly a king. Of course, Jonathan and Martha Kent did just that in Smallville, Kansas. I don't know how many of you watched the TV show. I did watch some of that, naming the boy Clark Superman's alter ego. So Superman was received in a way similarly as Moses was. Pastor Ben, you can continue your thoughts. I was just reading and commenting.
No, that's great. I apologize for having to take care of that. I should have done it ahead of time. Yes, so the parallels, like you mentioned, between Moses, between Samson, Moses as the giver of the law, and Superman looking, at what is morally and ethically right, is what he stands for. And some of the really old comics, back in like the 40s and 50s and stuff, you can find even where he is not, I'm not going to say anti-government, but he is 100% for what is best for the people. He can look at something, whether it's the government that's doing it, or whether it's big business that's doing it, whether it's some, bad guy, mad scientist that's doing it, and he will go in, with immense strength and this moral fortitude that he absolutely knows what's right in any given circumstance, and he will go in and he will knock out the bad guy, he will tear down the evil machine, he will run really fast or jump over a building and stop it from collapsing on somebody. And so he's this synthesis of like this Moses and Samson character with the strength and the moral integrity, and then as we as Christians look at it, through our lens, we start to see that in a very similar way to Jesus, Superman isn't aligned with a government. He's not a king. He's not a president. He's not any of these things. He doesn't even set out to rule humanity, really. Just like Jesus came. He came to serve. He came to empty himself. He came, to show us the way and to say heaven's closer than we realize. And then you've got Superman here, who, as his father just said in the article that you're reading, you just got to show them the light. The people want to be good. They want to do good. They just need some help pointing in the right direction. And so that's what Superman's tasked with. And so, yeah, I think, the parallels are just amazing. And I feel like you should always be able to look, at Superman. I know there's, obviously some storylines, where there's the bad Superman and the this and that. I remember in the early 90s, I think it was, when Superman died. And it was huge. I had one of the original, Death of Superman comics. And it was, in like a white plastic, bag, and just had the Superman emblem on it. And then, of course, he couldn't stay dead for too long. They weren't going to make any money with him being dead, so DC had to bring him back. But then you had the rebirth story, right? And so here again, we have Jesus. Superman so often puts himself in positions where he either has to potentially die to save somebody, or put himself in, great peril or risk to do what is best for others. And so I just love that. Absolutely love it. It's not a traditional Jewish Messiah figure in that sense, but it does parallel really well with Jesus.
We have our friend Del Mysterio. He says he's sharing this video with his 17-year lost stepson. I don't know what is lost. Maybe that's a typo. But anyway, yeah, thank you, brother, and welcome back. And thank you for sharing our material with others. Yeah, so that was, I think, a nice intro when it comes to comparison to not just Jesus, but also some of the Old Testament characters. It says Superman's alter ego is mild-mannered Clark Kent, reporter at the Daily Planet. As we know, the names Clark and Kent, some say, have double meanings that reinforce the Christ connection. Clark is an Old English term for a clergyman. I didn't know that. And Kent may be derived from the biblical Kenites in Genesis 15:19. I didn't know that either. That's awesome. He switches between these roles to live on Earth as both man and superhero. And of course, just like Pastor Ben said at the beginning, he just removes his hair, his glasses, put a suit, and no one can recognize him, which is like very silly. Jesus, Jesus had also had a dual persona, that of a man and that of God and the Holy Spirit. These dual personalities as both man and something higher is another comparison between Superman and Christ. Yeah, I would say that it's not a perfect parallel, but just as Jesus would uh, well, Jesus will have dual nature. Superman wouldn't have necessarily dual nature, but he will have this dual personality. We're like, hey, I'm a news reporter, but then in my free time I save people. Jesus, like, here I am. I'm fully God, fully man. I'm not disguising. This is who I am. I don't have any spandex, super suit over there. I'm always Jesus. But in his so it's not a perfect parallel, but there is some parallel still to be made, because Superman, he's like, I'm a news reporter, and then I'm doing good things out there. So I think this is fair to a certain degree. Although the Superman legend springs from Jewish roots, just as Christianity itself does, the creators of Superman Returns have made their own mark on the character, a mark that looks an awful lot like the cross. Superman film directors like Richard Donner, in the 1978 Superman the movie, this was the first Superman that came out, and Superman Returns director Bryan Singer chose to portray Superman as a Christ figure. The S on Superman's chest might just as well stand for Savior. I think it actually means Serbian, but I may be biased. I may be just biased. In my mind, that's what it means. But whatever. I don't have any scholarly source.
It's the Serbian savior. Yeah.
Yeah. It just my objective opinion. Singer acknowledged as much in a recent interview with Wizard magazine. Superman is the Jesus Christ of superheroes. Woo! And again, this is a little bit of old article, so that's why it doesn't cover anything coming lately when it comes to the Superman universe. But that's still okay, because it's a very thoroughly done article. Christ lived in a time when Hebrews sometimes referred to God as El. Well, yes, but also the Canaanites, because El simply meant God. It was a noun, just like in my language, I would say God, Bog, or in Spanish, you would say Dios, or in Greek, you'll say Theo or Theos. So yeah, I mean, this was just a noun. It wasn't a personal name of God. So yeah, that would refer to God as El. Superman's birth name is Kal-El, son of Jor-El. Christ and Superman were both sent from above to offer salvation for humanity. Both had evil twins. That's very interesting. The Antichrist and Bizarro. Finally, the most tellingly, Christ and Superman both died and were subsequently resurrected. Okay, I'll stop here. Pastor Ben, what are your thoughts on this part so far?
So, yeah, I didn't know the thing about Clark, meaning clergyman. I'd never heard that before. Kenites, I don't know. It's kind of a stretch, but that's fine. I don't know that I would consider the Antichrist as the evil twin of Jesus. But I get where the author of the article is going with that. So, artistic license, I guess that's good. And yeah, the parallels so far that they've talked about are awesome. Jesus comes from, God via the Virgin Mary. Superman comes from Jor-El, from the planet Krypton. Jor-El is almost a godlike scientist, who seems, even though, he's on Krypton, seems to really, really know about Earth people, and what we're like, and what we need, and who we are as, kind of like the human race. And so, he decides, I'm going to send my son, to you, just like God said, I'm going to send my son to you, obviously having an intimate knowledge of us as our creator. And so, yeah, those kind of parallels are great. He talks about the whole thing about sacrifice and resurrection, which seems pretty obvious to me, that Superman gets beat down, maybe even sort of killed several times throughout the comics, but he always comes back, and he comes back bigger and better than what he was previously. Maybe not necessarily in the movies, but in the comics. He is a pillar of virtue. And so, yeah, I like him for that.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I was about to make a comment that unlike some old movies in well, maybe not in this version of 2025, which I haven't seen yet, but in some older movies with, I think, with Henry, his underwear is not outside anymore. It's like he changed so much, evolved so much. I was just trying to be silly, but not just in his look. Like he became more powerful. He became more muscular. But we see the same thing in Batman. We see with so many characters. Back then, they were like faster, better, stronger, but they were not seen almost as gods. Nowadays, all these superheroes, they're seen as with small g gods. Like there's something that we're looking up to, with something like that we desire to be, at least men. There's always this knightly side, brave side, like sacrificial side, I'm gonna take my sword and I'm gonna fight evil. Not literally, but that's what most men desire. And if you don't have that moral and spiritual compass, like many men turn to some sort of addiction, some sort of path that is not necessarily a blessing for them. It can be a path of destruction. So that's why, since the childhood, so many boys are looking up to characters like Superman, because I want to do good, I want to protect the innocent, I want to be remembered, I want to leave a legacy. And these things are normal, especially again for men, because men are craving for purpose. And this is why when someone sees a character like Superman, he should always look at someone even bigger, Jesus. I like this segment. It says, consider this. Superman is sent to Earth as a baby in a rocket ship shaped like a star, which lands in a rural cornfield. Christ's arrival was also heralded by a star seen by shepherds in a field. Superman is raised on Earth in a backwater town reminiscent of Nazareth. It's called Smallville. Like Christ, Superman grows up where people have no idea of the powers he possesses, or what his true identity, his true nature, a Christian might say, really is. And yeah, this is very true. Jesus was hiding who he was. Even in the wedding of Cana, when Mary asked him to do the miracle, he was like, be silent, woman, it's not my time. But yet he still did it. So to a certain degree, he was trying to hide his messianic or supernatural side. Of course, we're talking about Jesus, until his time came. So in the last 3 years or 3.5 years of his life, then he, if I can put quote unquote, exploded. But even then, at the very beginning, he would say to people, don't tell everyone, because his time was not done yet. He needed a few years and many hundreds of miles to walk and just spread the gospel, heal people, love people, hug people, rescue them from the dominion of darkness. Superman also, in the very beginning, not just him, but also his parents are hiding who he is. So again, we see more similarities in this, not just in their towns, but also in their childhoods. Any comment on that?
Yeah, I think that's all right on. I love how he draws the parallel about being raised, by step parents, because the whole story of the gospel, for us Gentiles, is one of adoption. And when you look at, Clark Kent, at this young couple farmers, out in the middle of Kansas in the cornfield, they're like, they know when they're looking down at that crater and there's a baby in it, they know that this kid's special, right? And they 100% adopt him and they take him in as their own, and they love him and they raise him, in the way that, they believe is right and that he should go. And so they really instill, those morals in him as he grows up. And so I think that there is just a lot of beauty in that fact, and thinking, what if, if you wanted to throw a what if comic out there, if Superman had landed, in the backyard of like Lex Luthor's parents or something, I don't know, some kind of bad guy who obviously wasn't raised properly and ends up, being raised to find evil as a virtue, then he wouldn't be the Superman that we know him to be. And so it's a really strong story of adoption and the impact that we can have on people's lives, and also how we as adopted heirs of the King can look to him to instill his virtue and his life into us. And so I think that parallel is just beautifully done.
And one can even say that it was divine providence that Superman's parents found him and adopted him. Like, because it couldn't be just anyone. It had to be someone with special care, with special love, that, they'll have good and moral compass, that would raise the boy in a proper way to love people and judge correctly, righteously. And when we read the Gospels, especially was it in Luke, when Jesus got lost and Mary and Joseph were looking for him and they found him at the temple, he was like, "Why are you looking at me? Why are you confused? Like, don't you know that I have to be, in my Father's home?" It's like, since the very beginning, that was his mission. So he was, yes, he loved and obeyed them as parents. Of course, Jesus wouldn't be breaking commandments, but he was also, be there close to his Father. And because you mentioned adoption as something so beautiful, I just want to parallel. These were the words of my systematic theology 2 Professor Beckett Moody, who said that something in these lines, that adoption is the highest privilege that God gives to people. So yeah, many times we talk about forgiveness, Jesus dying for our sins, him cleansing us, blessing us, all of these things, but we don't necessarily always or often even use the word adoption. So it's like, think about adoption. There's nothing you could have done to be adopted. What could have you done? It says in the Bible that before we even cared, before we even loved him, before we were born, he loved us. He picked us. He chose us. So it's like, how do you even respond to something like that? Like, with Superman, it's similar, but it's not completely the same, right? So yeah, they found him supposedly by mistake, but again, I believe it was providence. And in our lives, nothing is a mistake. God comes and he knocks and he calls and he rescues us. What can you do? You're drowning, you're dying. Like, what is it there that you can do as a spiritually dead person? You can't save yourself. So again, that picture of adoption, I think even, again, I'm a single person, I'm not a father like you, Ben, so I cannot speak from the same shoes like you can. But I would imagine how beautiful and emotional would be the scenario where people adopt kids because they cannot have their own children, or maybe they can, but they still want to adopt more kids because they want to love on people. On children, they're misfortunate and abandoned, and they need love. So imagine but that's still a glimpse to how God the Father sees us and adopts us. And he even says in John's Gospel that he loves us in the same way that he loves Jesus. I mean, look, I've read hundreds of theological books, and in general, I had one of the best professors. I wrote so many papers. I got good grades. None of that helped me to understand how can God love me in the same way that he loves Jesus. For me, that's mind-blowing. I can't explain that. I can't write a paper on that. I can't theologically try to discern. I can only receive that, but it's still mind-blowing. I'm like, God, are you telling me that you loved your son, who is co-eternal with you and co-creator with everything, that someone who obeyed you perfectly, who is always perfect, had no beginning, no end, someone who is part of you, so to speak, you loved him the same way you love me, or actually you would love me the same way you love Jesus. But who am I? Who am I but a dust? So in that way, when you see yourself, not to like intentionally put yourself down as some false humility, no, but actually see like, hey, there's so much darkness in my heart. not just before coming to Christ, even when you walk with Christ, if you are honest, there's so much of unconquered sin and things that we wrestle with. Yet God doesn't give up. You're adopted and you're still in the family, because if you don't walk away from God's home, why would he walk away from you? So he's still there. You're still his. Even if you don't feel good enough, you're still his because of what he did, not because of what you did. And again, what can you do? You're just like speechless. You're in awe. You're like, literally, oh my God, what can I do? There's nothing. You just received that gift in your heart, and you're like, God, you washed me away. You paid for my sin. Like, you know, it's like, what can I do? I can't do anything for you. There's nothing that you owe me. It's like I can do favors to you. Like, I can just try to live for you the best I can. So that whole scenario, that whole theme of adoption is so beautiful, so emotional. So if we would just talk about adoption, I think we can even make a short episode just on adoption, how God adopts us. And he engraved us on his palms, and he'll never forgive us. I'm sorry, forget us. I'm like, God, but don't you remember what I did a few days ago? Or I'm like, how can you still love me? I don't understand God's logic. I don't understand God's ways. I don't understand God's thinking and love of me, because I'm like, I don't deserve it. So in you as a pastor, I know we're drifting a little bit, but this is so important, because here we're talking about theology, and here we're being biblical, and here I wanted this short segment to be pastoral, because you're a pastor. How do you even deal with people who are already serving Christ, but they feel so inadequate? They like, I'm a failure. I did this thing again, Pastor Ben. They come talk to you. Like, do you remind them of Jesus's blood? Do you remind them of his adoption? Do you remind them that they were bought by Christ? Like, because this is so important for us. Even as Christians, we should never forget adoption.
So, yes, absolutely. When people forget who we are in Jesus, when Christians forget that, when we forget that he bought us, he is conforming us to his image, that he paid the price, that we're being sanctified, and part of sanctification sometimes hurts. Sometimes it's a pruning process. Sometimes it's like refining gold, where you get melted down. And so I remind Christians that when we're following God, we're not promised an easy life. We're not promised, roses and, unicorns and rainbows all the time. We are promised that Christ is with us, that he goes through it. He is there, beside us at all times, and that he's our ever-present help in time of need. And then on the flip side of that, when people are struggling with like a besetting sin, Jesus was absolutely perfect at knowing what was needed to heal someone. Was it spiritual? Was it emotional? Was it physical? What was it that they needed to be delivered from the bondage that they were in? And too often as pastors or as Christians, we mean well, and we say, oh, you're struggling if you'll just pray this prayer, or if you'll just believe harder, whatever that is, if you just had more faith. And we end up putting judgment on people because of it. And so I have to take a step back, and I have to say, honestly, the chemicals in your body might be out of balance. You might need to see a doctor. God has given doctors wisdom. There are things that can help you with what you're struggling with. Maybe you need to change your diet. Maybe you need to, cut out some of this other stuff that is in your life. Maybe you kind of need to quit listening to all this music, or, partaking in certain types of media, because what we put into our bodies is what's going to come out in our lives. And so, maybe I'll encourage them to, listen to some worship music, instead of the rah all the time. Not that there's anything wrong with, that, but we just have to be careful that we always point back to Jesus, always say, yes, he loves us. But we also have to understand that when we're dealing with each other, the children of God, and even those who have yet to join us in the family, it's like we're dealing with people. And people have wounds and they have scars, and there's a multitude of issues and baggage that we bring with us to the table. And so you can't just label somebody and say, if you just had more faith, if you just prayed harder, if you spent more time reading your Bible, then everything in life is going to be hunky-dory. And so we got to meet people where they're at, show them the love of Jesus by being the love of Jesus to them where they are. And then building that relationship, hopefully you can see that they'll start to come out of whatever funk, or they'll get to a place where they can start to move past that and ask different questions and continue to grow in their faith and their walk.
By the way, I just want to say, for people who try to find faults and call people heretics, when I said that Jesus was part of God, I didn't mean that in a literal way, like breaking the Trinitarian Godhead or something. I meant in a way that
it's not a oneness thing.
Yeah. So I just wanted to clarify in a way that the word, the logos, was with God, right? So they're unbreakable. So to see that God would love the Son and then love me the same way he would love the eternal logos, I can't ever comprehend. Maybe in the eternal now, when he comes back and reveals this to us, maybe not even then, I will never be able to understand how can God love someone like me who fails him versus Jesus, who is eternally perfect. So I just wanted to make that clear, just, in case people text me and call me names later. Jesus was raised by an earthly stepfather named Joseph, a carpenter. Clark, which incidentally means cleric, was also raised by a manual laborer, farmer Jonathan Kent. Ironically, Clark's parents were originally named Mary and Joseph in the comics, but later were changed to Martha and Jonathan. Okay, I didn't know this. So Superman's parents were originally named Mary and Joseph. Did you know this?
No, in fact, outside of this article, I have never, ever come across that fact before. And I've heard, about the Superman mythos and comparing, Superman's life to, Jesus and to saviors and stuff. I've been aware of that for a couple of decades, but I've never heard that before outside of this article. And I didn't fact check it, but if it's true, that's very interesting.
Yeah. Superman's Kryptonian father, Jor-El, sends Kal-El to Earth with these words in Superman Returns. They can be a great... Okay, we already covered that because the author is repeating himself. If this does not evoke echoes of John's Gospel, I don't know what does. Jesus is the light of the world. We already covered that. Okay. Interestingly, El is a Hebrew word for God. Okay, we covered that too. Cool. Superman hovers above Earth and listens via his super hearing to myriad cries for help from below. Man, I love this. This scene echoes what he will later tell Lois. You said the world doesn't need a savior, but every day I hear people crying for one. Superman answers those cries, flying to the rescue faster than a speeding bullet, breaking the sound barrier with a boom. This recalls Christ hearing our prayers on Earth. His response is even faster than Superman's. God is an ever-present help in trouble, and he's quoting Psalm 46:1. I'm also reminded, was it in Bruce Almighty or another movie where Jim Carrey is, for a short season of his life, he's God, and he's typing like extremely fast to the keyboard,
exactly,
answering the prayers. That was hilarious.
And finally, he just says, yes to all. Click. And everybody wins the lottery, and they all get like 10 cents. It's great.
Yeah, and then he's like, okay, done. He can chill out from prayers. Like, the prayers keep coming. He's like, oh my gosh, like it's too much for him. Yeah, I think this is beautiful. Not in a way that Superman takes the role of a Messiah, but this is, beautiful that we can always come to Christ, right? As our high priest and mediator. We read in the book of Hebrews, and Superman cannot literally hear every cry, right? He can hear to a certain degree, but he cannot hear, I don't know, someone praying on the other side of the globe. But Jesus can, because Jesus is all present. So here we see another parallel, but not totally, because Jesus is way more supreme than Superman. Superman's mortal enemy is Lex Luthor, a name that phonetically evokes that of Lucifer. That's interesting. Luthor is insanely jealous of Superman's power, just as Lucifer was of God. There's a scene where Superman, weakened by kryptonite, is savagely beaten by Luthor and his thugs. The violence is raw and very reminiscent of the Passion of the Christ. Seeing Superman stripped of his powers and trashed reminds one of Jesus holding back his great power, brutalized by the people he came to save. Superman is then stabbed in the side by Luthor with a shard of kryptonite, an unmistakable allusion to Christ being flogged and beat by the Romans before being sent for crucifixion. And while he was on the cross, he was stabbed in the side with a spear. Man, this is so good. Any comment on this passage, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, he's talking about. I believe he's talking about the Bryan Singer, the later movie there, and yeah, I mean it's absolutely powerful, and I think he's right on. Just like he's already quoted. Bryan Singer said in an interview that Superman is the Messiah of superheroes. Like, he wasn't shy about walking that line and making it be very apparent that this is what's happening. This is him getting beaten. This is him getting torn down. This is him sacrificing himself on behalf of trying to save people from the enemy, his arch nemesis, which is Lex Luthor. And so, yeah, and then the stab. So, and then my brain automatically goes, to like Justice League and all of that, and them, bringing Superman back to life. And I don't know, that's beside the point. So at any rate, yeah, I think that it was very obviously done to portray that in video in a way where people who maybe aren't familiar with the story of Jesus, or maybe who wouldn't ever walk into a church or pick up a Bible and read it, they're still going to get the message of self-sacrifice, of somebody who is infinitely more powerful than little old us, actually taking and dying on our behalf. And so they're getting the message, and now hopefully someone along the way will just be like, oh yeah, well, in real life, that's Jesus, right? And bring the point home for him.
Yeah, thanks for that. The last thing from this article says the comparisons between Superman and Christ, the final comparison between them is how both of them died to save the world and came back from the dead. And this is what you, Pastor Ben, said just a while ago. Christ died on the cross to abolish sin from humans, saving us in the afterlife, while Superman, quote unquote, died, launching a colossal hunk of kryptonite-infused land into deep space to save the lives of millions of people and the world from Lex Luthor's evil plans. And that's a beautiful ending, because just as Superman comes back, Jesus is coming back as well. I will skip this second article for the sake of time, and also I just went through it once again while you were talking, and it basically repeats a lot of stuff of what we were talking about. So we'll just go to another article where it mentions 11 parallels between Jesus and Superman, and we'll see what we didn't mention. Okay, so the first one is otherworldly conflict. The movie starts off with a conflict of power in Krypton, the heavenly realm. General Zod, wanting total power of the planet, gathers a number of natives from the planet to confront and overthrow the leaders of Krypton, mainly Jor-El, Superman's father. General Zod and his forces fail, however, and are damned to eternity of punishment. For a time, though, they roam about in the universe, aiming to disrupt the plans of the Jor-El. I mean, come on, this is like the story of Lucifer, right? Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, absolutely. you're talking about fallen angels. You're talking about Lucifer. You're talking about the fact that they get banished to, I think it was the negative zone. That shows up in one of the 80s movies as, a flat piece of crystal, and they're all shoved up against it trying to break out. So yeah, I mean, that's 100% on the money. I think that is exactly what was happening in some of the newer movies, when you see Zod, and you had like the peaceful scientists, right, who were wanting to make utopia on Krypton, but then you also had on the other side, you had like the warmongering, side that wanted to dominate and oppress, and because of that, they ended up destroying Krypton. And while Eden isn't destroyed, you can't access it anymore, like it's gone, it's away. But Jesus, or Superman ends up, and he's got kryptonite, and he's got some of the crystals and stuff, and so he's able to make his sanctum, right, his Isle of Silence and Solitude, where he can go and he can make it kind of like home, and he kind of makes it like an Eden, or a little bit of heaven on earth. And the whole time Jesus was here, the gospel he preached was, the kingdom of God is nigh. It's here. Heaven is closer than you can imagine it. And so I think that is a really awesome parallel. You've got, a supernatural storyline of, of Satan, of Lucifer, of, these other angels, angelic beings, falling to earth and then messing with humanity. And you've got Zod, and his other generals, or whatever they are, and the warmongering people that end up, fighting and destroying Krypton and stuff, and then going, ultimately finding their way to Earth, breaking free, and then continuing to try and mess with Superman, to spite Jor-El, their enemy from, hundreds of years ago, or whatever it was.
Thanks for that. I also have included in the live chat link to Pastor Ben, your and my video on the Silver Surfer theology. We thoroughly enjoyed that video. That video was like 2.5 hours. We covered several of the comic books. We hope we will not go that far in this episode with Superman, but it was equally good and deep and theological, as well as nerdy, right? So yeah, I recommend that episode to people who love comic books and like thinking deeper and finding parallels between the Bible and different characters and different things. So that will be a good episode. Okay, the second parallel is the name of Superman, Kal-El, is actually a Hebrew word transliterated as voice of God. Ooh, that's cool. Similarly, Jesus is referred to as the Word of God, of course. In addition, Jor-El also has spiritual meaning because El in Hebrew means God. However, I'm not going to act like I know any more Hebrew than El. This guy is funny. So I don't know what Jor means. I have seen in some sources that it refers to Jehovah, but in others it was something different. I think that Jor supposedly referring to Jehovah is just an assumption, or maybe people trying to see so much what is not necessarily there. I mean, the Tetragrammaton was not spelled with these letters, so but I don't know. I cannot claim to know the heart and motives of the original, creators, but I kind of doubt it. But this is very cool, Pastor Ben, that this will be supposedly mean, Kal-El would supposedly mean the voice of God. Then again, we know of Jesus being called the Word of God or divine logos. How awesome is that? Did you know about this?
No, again, until I came across, these articles, I wasn't aware of that at all. And yeah, that's kind of mind blowing to see that. When I think back to being a little kid, 5, years old or younger, and I remember wearing my Superman pajama onesie, right? With they had the footies on it and everything, and the little cape on the back. I never, as that little kid, would have thought, hey, I am wearing the costume of the voice of God. You know, like it just didn't exist. And so many people who look up to and enjoy Superman and his comics and the movies and stuff are unaware of these parallels. And I think you're right. I think, you know, some of these authors of these articles probably want to make it a little more than what it is. But some of the parallels are just plain as day. Whenever you're a writer and an author, if you're Jewish or if you're Christian, you know, I think that was something that Tolkien was a big advocate of. You don't have to make it an absolute, you know, one-to-one metaphor or parable. Because you are a Christian, because you are Jewish, it's going to seep out of you into the story. The parallels are going to be there. It doesn't have to be so blatant as, you know, necessarily a lion roaring.
Yeah, for example, when Aerosmith says "walk this way," it's not necessarily a parallel to the gospel. You can make it, but it's not. Right. So that would be, I think, a good example of how maybe sometimes we can see too much or think too much and draw the parallels that are not necessarily there. Okay, point number 3. Furthermore, in the backstory of the conflict in Krypton, before Superman comes to the scene, Jor-El, his father, encodes the Codex, which contains all possibility of life in the heavenly realms, into the blood of Kal-El, Superman. Similarly, Christianity holds the same notion for life and salvation, that it is only found in the blood of the Son of God. And we see all these passages, but that's cool. Number 4, Jor-El sends Kal-El to Earth, knowing that the humanity would reject him, but he did it anyway because it was the only way. And again, we know this to perfectly parallel the gospel. Clark Kent waited until the appointed time, this is number 5, to save the world, at which point he was 33 years old. I didn't know this either. Similarly, Jesus began proclaiming his lordship and saviorship when he was 30, but actually made atoning salvation for the world when he was 33. Okay, I'll stop here. What do you have to say when it comes to these couple of things that I've read about Jesus's blood, Superman's blood, and the Codex, and this appointed time when it comes to the age of 33?
Yeah, the Codex. I think that's awesome. I think that is a beautiful parallel, and you know, to say that because all life, you know, for us is found, you know, through the blood of Jesus. I think that is wonderful. I love that. You know, Superman was rejected by many. Many looked at him, you know, not the least of which was, you know, Bruce Wayne, you know, Batman initially looked at him and said, hey, you know, this guy's too powerful. He's too godlike. People are going to worship him. You know, power corrupts. So absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. And so many didn't accept Superman. They didn't like him. They didn't want him. The evil people certainly didn't want him. And so it's true. You know, they were constantly finding ways and scheming and trying to get rid of him. Just like when Jesus showed up on earth and he's preaching, you know, the gospel and the good news that he had brought to the Jews, the powers that be that were in control didn't like it. And they said, hey, you're upending all of our tradition. You're upending our power structure. We don't want that. And so they were like, we got to get rid of this guy. And I think that parallels very, very well. Yeah, the whole 33 years of age thing, obviously, you know, I knew it about Jesus, but it was one of those things that I hadn't ever encountered before. Knowing that at the point in the comics when when Superman actually died, that he was, you know, representing or being a 33-year-old person. It never even occurred to me to wonder what age he was. I know in the original TV series and in the original, you know, comics, from way back when, you know, he was always represented as a much older man, even in some things showing, you know, like a streak of gray hair down the side. And so that wouldn't line up with the age. But initially in those stories, he was more of the Jewish type Messiah of Samson and Moses, and he wasn't more of the Christ figure Messiah that we see later after Christians got a hold of the storyline. So Superman, like all superheroes, has been retconned time and time again. They go back and they reboot the story, or they switch to a different, parallel dimension or a different universe or whatever, to switch things up. So that's cool. I think that that's really neat that he was, 33 at the time that he died in that storyline, to portray a 33-year-old man dying, for the world like Jesus did at the age of 33. I like that a lot.
Okay, thank you. Number 6, Jor-El commissioned Kal-El to be the bridge between two peoples. In response, Kal-El agreed, stated, "I will save them," and then fell out of the space shuttle in the shape of a cross. Wow, that's amazing. Similarly, Jesus was commissioned by the Father to be the bridge between God and humanity, the mediator of heaven and earth, through the saving power of reconciliation by the cross. Jor-El said that it was necessary for Kal-El to go to Earth so that he could truly relate to humanity, knowing and experiencing their sufferings, as that would qualify him to be the adequate leader and savior. And we know this to be true with Jesus. When General Zod wanted to destroy Superman and Earth, he erected 2 giant magnetic devices on opposite sides of the planet to pulsate a new atmospheric composition and level of gravity, fundamentally reversing the natural order of Earth and making it more like his own dark dominion. In the same way, the curse of sin under Satan's rule reversed the natural order of creation, making life morally corruptible and the chaos inhospitably inhuman. The symbol, well, I'll wait. I'll stop here because I read 3 of this. Okay, when it comes to Jesus being the bridge between two peoples, number 6, then in number 7, that Kal-El had to relate with humanity, and number 8, when General Zod was trying to make this kind of satanic dark kingdom for his own purposes. What are your thoughts?
Let's see. Yeah, as far as 6 and 7, absolutely. 8, again, like I haven't read a lot of the background Superman stuff, and so there's a few, of the seminal storylines that I've read, and of course have watched all the movies and some of the TV shows. But yeah, I wasn't even aware necessarily that was the purpose behind what Zod was doing, and I think that's really pretty cool in how it does show, that, because of sin, right? Sin allowed the curse to come in, and the curse is what made life on Earth inhospitable to people. And then, of course, Satan's gonna ramp that up and try to get us to continue to fall and to look towards things other than Jesus for our salvation. And obviously that isn't going to lead us to life. So I think that's really interesting that was the point behind what Zod was doing. I remember in the old 80s movie, one of the most godlike things that Superman is seen doing, right, is flying against the Earth's rotation to make the Earth spin backwards so that time would go backwards, as if that was even how it worked. But I still love that imagery that he could turn back time, he could undo all of the floods and the death and the chaos and all of, basically the sin and the shame and all of that. He could make that right, just like Jesus can make that right for us in our lives and for the earth. Eventually we're getting there. So I think that's great.
I think that was a motivation that inspired Cher in her song "If I Could Turn Back Time."
Yeah, definitely.
She was thinking about Superman and Jesus, of course. Okay, lastly, parallels between before we switch to this amazing comic book Kingdom Come. Number 9, the symbol of on Superman's chest, S, which of course we know means Serbian, actually stands for hope in this worldly context. Likewise, Jesus stands as the only hope for humanity. And of course, we agree with this. At the end of the movie, an American general tells Superman that they cannot be sure they can trust him. Superman responds that he's one of them, born and raised alongside them, and that he's rescuing of them proves that he's for them. But ultimately, they must trust his authority over them, which is good by remembering his rescue of them was good. In the same way, Jesus rules with all deserving authority, and we can trust his authority over us. That is good because his rescue of us was good. Last one, Louis Lane, the famous news reporter, has no connection to Mary Magdalene. I asked the director about this. You can trust me, ha. But if anything, Louis Lane resembles the church, the bride of Christ. Well, she was lifted up. Louis Lane was lifted up with Superman in the air and will be lifted up. That's cool. That's cool. I want to see if that's part of the article. If it's not, I actually came up with something new that the author of the article didn't. Let me see. So Louis Lane resembles the church, the bride of Christ, who is collectively called to participate in his mission by spreading the news of the saving work of Christ to the world. Christians are news reporters, not saviors. He didn't put about us, meeting with Jesus in the heaven upon his return, not in heaven, but in the sky. So what are your thoughts on these last 3 parallels with Louis Lane representing the church, this American general telling Superman, and then Superman about, they cannot trust him, but Superman tells, well, you have to trust me because I'm for you. And then the Superman chest S, I think we know what it means. Come on,
Yeah,
we don't have
I think everybody knows the S stands for hope. Yeah. He said that.
No, the original S, but I don't want to brag.
Well, right. Yeah. And yeah, so it's interesting, the American general at the end of the movie talking about trust, and, Superman's kind of like, well, you don't really have an option, but, it should comfort you to know that I'm for you. Look what I did. It was for your good and it all worked out. So that ties in and is actually a really great segue when we get into looking at Kingdom Come, because that is a lot of what, drove Superman to do what he did in that comic series. But yeah, Superman has the authority, right? He could do a hostile takeover of the entire planet if he wanted to. At one point he decides nukes and war is not the way to do it, and so he gathers them all up and throws them into the sun, right? So it's like there is this power about him, but he doesn't want to lord it over the earth. He doesn't want to force peace. He just wants to make peace possible and have mankind choose it for themselves. And so I think that to an extent, yes, Jesus, same thing. He had immense power. He could literally just, say, I am he, and knock people down. When a whole crowd of people would be watching him, listening to him preach, and then all of a sudden they decide they're going to stone him, it says that he could just basically disappear and walk through them and nobody could find him or where he went, And so Jesus, as God incarnate, has immense power and knowledge, and he absolutely 100% could have came in like what the Jews at the time were expecting their Messiah to do. He could have come in and established an earthly kingdom and kicked Caesar out and forced Jewish ideals and the Torah on everybody, and he could have absolutely subjugated the earth at that point. But that wasn't what Jesus did. Instead, he came as a servant. Instead, he came and brought peace and brought hope and, brought this beautiful, wonderful, good news to us that allowed all of us, to be incorporated and grafted into the family and the kingdom of God. And I think that is the better thing than if he had shown up the way they were expecting him to, allowing us the free will and the choice to choose to be loyal to him and to submit and to follow a loving, God who created us for a purpose. Yeah.
Amen. And I just want to say that for this purpose, I intentionally put this shirt on where Jesus is standing with all this. Unfortunately, most of these are Marvel characters, and we're talking about DC. But Jesus's message here is basically what I wanted to relate with, with this topic tonight. When it comes to Jesus, Jesus is the one that saves the world. It's not Superman. Let's say that, hypothetically speaking, superheroes can exist and they can save us. So we still need someone like Jesus who will save us from inside, from our wretchedness. And Superman cannot do that. So that's why I wanted to put my old shirt on. So again, we'll be speaking the second half. I actually hope we can cover everything else in the next 30 to 40 minutes. So we'll be talking about this comic book called Kingdom Come. Again, it's only $11 on Amazon. Buy it. I don't gain anything by you buying or not, so I actually don't care. But I'm just recommended because 1 to 5 stars, I will give it 4.5. I don't give 5 stars easily to anything. That's rare. 4.5, that's still super high. So do yourself a favor, get a comic book called Kingdom Come, 400 pages for $11. Are you kidding me? That's like 2 coffees. Can't even buy them. Maybe you can buy like a modest meal for that money. But yeah, let me just share this beautiful picture from Kingdom Come while we are talking, because people they don't like my face, they can still look at the background. So we'll be discussing the content of this comic book Kingdom Come that has 4 chapters. So we'll be dealing first with chapter 1. It starts very apocalyptic. There are thunder, earthquakes, hail, fire, blood, and a great star falling from the sky, right? This is the Revelation introduction. We see Pastor Norman and Wesley, his friend. Wesley is unfortunately dying, and they're both Christians. Wesley called himself the Sandman and said how he and the pastor were the 2 eyewitnesses from Revelation. He misses the days of old superheroes and how they inspired human achievement, because this is in the time post superheroes. So this is sometime in the future, I would say. Not too far, but sometime in the future. The new generation of people are losing hope, in humanity, in the future, and in everything. And they used to look up to Superman and other superheroes, but now they don't have anyone to look up to. Unfortunately, if we're going to generalize and say that's because they don't have God, but there is no one to inspire them when it comes to the earthly level, to this worldly level. Someone that used to be Superman, Batman, Justice League, the whole movement. The progeny of the superheroes in the new generation of superheroes in this era are not noble anymore. And this is the introduction of people that will be soon meeting who have superpower energies and powers, but they're not actually doing good things. They just fight for the sake of fighting. Because of these superhumans, the end is coming near. The pastor starts sharing slowly but surely the same dreams and visions as his friend Wesley, who passes away. Suddenly, as sort of an angel, and we find out a little bit after that, which actually Spectre, a ghost superhero, this sort of an angel that speaks of himself as serving a higher power. He doesn't say the identity of this higher power, comes to the church and meets Pastor Norman and warns him of this coming evil. This so-called angel is there to punish those who bring evil. And he said to this pastor that once Earth boasted other saviors, with small s, who might have stemmed the tide of destruction. This angel takes him in the spirit to see Superman, who is now a middle-aged widow because his spouse dies and he's just a farmer. In his discussion with the Wonder Woman, Superman, right, who is banished from her kingdom, Superman reveals that he tried to warn the world about him. Soon we'll find out who is him, but they didn't listen. And here we see one of the parallels from the very beginning. Just like the prophets and apostles didn't listen well, they were not received well by people, including Jesus. Not many people would listen to them. Except that now Superman lives in solitude. So he got discouraged and he withdrew into himself, has a peaceful life with his dog, and he's just enjoying life alone on the farm. We find out that Superman here is talking about Magog, which is another biblical terminology, because if Magog is an ancient enemy of Israel, Magog here would be a sort of an enemy in the comic book. So Magog is the leader of the new breed of these so-called heroes, even though they're not heroes. They have superpowers, but they're not heroes. They're merciless. They're known to people as the one responsible for Superman's farewell. In this battle of Magog and Justice League with this former, another meta-human called the Parasite, 1 million people plus animals died, leaving several American states as a radiation wasteland, which caused famine. Now, Wonder Woman begs Superman to come back and help people. This so-called angel explains to the pastor, because they're present in the vision all the time and no one can see them. So Spectre explains to the pastor that Superman failed to see himself as an inspiration to others, and if he won't fight back, well, others won't fight back either. Superman abandoning the battlefield shook both people and other good superheroes from older generations. So Superman got discouraged and withdrew to himself. Others did as well. But Flash is now called a guardian angel in Keystone City, where he patrols the right and does the right and corrects the wrong. People says that he's everywhere at once, almost trying to represent God, who is all present. Hawkman and has his own region where he performs justice, and people call him a savior and an environmentalist terrorist for helping animals. On the other hand, in the Emerald City, Green Lantern reigns. So we see all these different superheroes, even though they're not working together in the Justice League with Superman anymore, and they withdrew, they still have their own regions, which, and I'll stop talking here, Pastor Ben, comes to another biblical parallel, at least to me, where God divided the planet according to the sons of God and gave all of them regions to justly rule. However, in Psalm 82, we see that most of them failed and they did not judge righteously. So I'll stop here if you want to comment on this introduction of the Kingdom Come comic.
Yeah. So it is so steeped with biblical imagery, on purpose. The whole concept, of, kingdom come is, thy will be done, thy kingdom come, on thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Right. And so that's what it's pulling from. And it's amazing to see how the character of the Spectre he's kind of partly, if you're going to parallel him to Marvel, he's kind of like the Watcher in that he kind of can see everything. He's not necessarily omnipresent, but he is there to watch people's choices and not necessarily to intervene. And then after whatever the event is that he's there to observe, to watch, he is supposed to pass judgment on whatever happens. And so you start out and you've got, you've got the pastor and you've got his friend who just seems a little crazy. And the friend ends up seeming crazier and crazier, and he talks about all these visions that he's been having, and that he believes, God's given him these visions. And the pastor's just kind of like, okay, they're there, my poor friend, I love you so much, let me pray for you. And then once his friend does in fact die and pass away, the pastor now is starting to receive the visions. And so then Spectre shows up on the scene, and Spectre's like, hey, I have chosen you. And that's one of the things about Spectre is he needs a living, breathing human to be his anchor so that he doesn't get so out of touch with humanity that he can't relate or have empathy or have compassion for them. So he needs a human anchor. And so he's chosen this pastor as this human anchor, and he's able to, take the pastor up kind of like in the spirit and go and view these events, some in the past, some in the present, some in the future of the time. And I think it's so cool because, the pastor even says, he's like, it's hard to tell what time we're in because where we are, there isn't time, and we're going and we're viewing these things. And he's constantly asking, okay, when did this happen? Is this happening now? Is this happening in the future? And, it's like John's revelation. It's like, any of the apocalyptic, visions, from, Daniel or Isaiah. And it's like, when you get taken up in the spirit, it's kind of like, wow, I'm seeing this, but I don't know what to make of it. And so Spectre is there, and he's filling in the blanks to the pastor, and he's saying, this is what you're seeing. This is what's happening. Superman has basically turned his back on all of humanity because he feels like humanity has turned their back on him. And so he has, just cloistered himself away in this imaginary, Kansas that he's made up, and is just trying to live the simple life. And then Wonder Woman comes in, she shows up, and she's basically like, how long are you going to let this happen? You are so out of touch with the people of Earth and what they're actually experiencing, because, Diana is kind of like a demigod. She's, an Amazonian, and she's, from an island that's actually not really kind of a part of Earth. And, Ares, demigods, like all of those Greek, mythos demigods are there and real. And that's kind of was her job, to fight Ares. The Amazons felt like she failed, and so they kind of kicked her out and said, yeah, you're not it anymore. You failed. And so she's not the queen of the Amazons anymore. And she's coming with this news, and she's, talking to Superman, calling him Clark. And I love that he's like, I'm not Clark. I'm not Clark anymore. Clark's dead. Clark doesn't exist. Clark died when Lois died. Like Clark isn't here. He has completely removed all of the humanity that he had learned to live in. He's removed himself from it. And he's like, you can call me, Cal. You can call me Kal-El. I'm not Clark. And so there's just, on one hand, it's like we've got this deep, rich, spiritual vision, that's happening as we're seeing this stuff. And then we're seeing what we have grown up and come to know and love as a Messiah type figure who has said, you know what, they didn't want me. I was here. I saved them over and over and over again, but they didn't want me. And so I'm taking myself out of the equation. And he has left the human race to be on its own because he felt betrayed. And in doing so, he has left his humanity behind. And he's having a hard time relating or caring about what's going on now.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, so this is basically the end of chapter 1. There are 4 in the comic books. So Superman finally, changes his mind. Of course, did you really think he will be heartless or cold-hearted? No. So he finally changes his mind. He comes to help people and to disarm these metahumans, superhumans. He stands in the sky just like Jesus will stand upon his return, as people rejoice and their faith is being restored. But now Superman is hit. This new segment starts also with revelation. Good superheroes are compared to the 7 angels. Inevitably, politics is involved. another bad superhero. Uh, well, I won't call him bad superhero. That sounds like does it sound
Yeah.
contradictory? Let's call him bad superhuman, called Ameri Commando. It's like American Commando. So
Yeah.
Ameri Commando, he threatens to shoot the fire against the invading hungry immigrants. So again, it's getting political. Other bad superhumans battle him over territory, while the immigrants could be a casualty. Suddenly, these super angels or seven superheroes with their leader Superman show to protect the innocent. The narrator calls them not angels but gods. Superman's speech about the fight and his judgment of the new slash bad superhumans sound almost like Psalm 82 copied pasted. Superman rebukes this new generation of superhumans for not showing truth and justice, and that's quote unquote to these immigrants, to these poor people. But Superman and his whole crew are back to restore the order. Superman goes to Batman's cave to ask Batman to rejoin them, but Batman is not interested because he has his own human network that supervises the crime in many cities, and his methods are not like Superman's. He calls Superman's methods totalitarian solutions, and he says that he, unlike Superman, does not wish to rule the world. Ouch! Very important spiritual lesson. Behind the scenes, Lex Luthor and his team called Mankind Liberation Front, MLF, plot a plan to further divide humans and metahumans. Now, Superman goes after these metahumans to invite them to join the Justice League because he doesn't want to just beat them up. He's like, okay, let me give them a chance. Let me invite these, superhumans who are behaving badly. Let me give them a chance to invite them to join the Justice League, to be, on the side of good guys. And if they do, they will have to change. One lady even said that she felt like being asked to become the 13th disciple. She said that the League knows the way. Again, very New Testamental lingo. Now, Superman and his crew have more than 7 members. They gather in seemingly Green Lantern's space station, so outside the planet. And Superman has his throne almost like God, and he's surrounded by his followers. Very interesting. Justice League begins to confront anarchy on a global scale. People see Superman as a world leader, but many of these metahumans do not want to convert. They keep being violent, and once imprisoned, they're captives, not converts. On Superman's question what to do with those who refuse to see the light, and that's another quotation, Wonder Woman takes him to an underwater city, and it's King Arthur, who is actually Aquaman, and asks him for the metahumans to be imprisoned there, which Aquaman denies. Superman doesn't like the idea of his opponents being thrown to jail. Justice League finally finds Magog, this new Superman's opponent, and Superman and Magog have a discussion on their past, and they start blaming each other for the current events and the crisis in the world. Magog reminds Superman that since Magog wanted to kill Joker for his crimes, and Superman stopped him and brought him to the court, the majority of Americans liked Magog more than Superman. Why? Well, because they wanted vengeance. They wanted swift justice. And when Magog demanded from Superman to become Metropolis's new number 1, Superman flew off because he didn't want Magog to represent the future. Superman even went to ask Orion, who is Darkseid's son, because in the meantime, Darkseid is being overthrown by his son, who's called Orion. So Superman goes to visit Orion and ask him for advice because he's wise. But Orion only offers help to serve as cosmic jail for these superhumans, and doesn't give him any deeper sort of help, any deeper advice, and Superman doesn't want it. And this chapter 2 finishes that in the meantime, Batman, surprise, surprise, joins Lex Luthor's the MLF, which is Mankind Liberation Front group. So again, it's a very action-packed, but also theologically packed chapter 2, where Superman is presiding over his throne, just like in Psalm 82 or in Deuteronomy 32. The so-called small g gods are surrounding him. Before more superhumans join Justice League, Superman is seen as one of the 7 angels from Revelation. Well, Superman and the rest of the six of the Justice League are seen as those from, seven angels from Revelation. Also, Superman wants to be so much graceful to give chance to the new people to convert instead of immediately punish them. And he says, I want them to see the way, right? And also, one lady, she said when she was asked to join, she said, "Why? Like, wow, I felt like being the 13th disciple." That's like you cannot not see the gospel here. Like the 13th disciple, like where is this coming from? Of course, it's the new gospel. The New Testament and the Gospel. So, Pastor Ben, this is a little bit of a lengthy chapter. What will be your comments on this?
So this chapter really starts to tie the story together. We start to understand why, Superman has hidden himself away. We start to look at Magog and realize that the new brand of superhero is really more like an anti-hero. They're doing the wrong things for the right reasons. And so, yeah, it shows, Joker's been arrested for the billionth time. He was in Metropolis, so he was, outside of Batman's jurisdiction. And Superman was going to try and get Joker, from the police, and he was going to, arrest him and do his duty. But Magog just happened to be close enough that he was able to respond and get there first. And he doesn't blink. He doesn't hesitate. I mean, right as Supes is flying in and shows up, Magog just blasts Joker, right? Just kills him, just destroys him, just done. He's got this like staff, and he's like and zaps him with it. And Superman's like, I can't believe it. I can't believe that you just murdered the Joker. And so Magog, is just kind of like, well, I did what I did. And it ends up, going to court, and it shows the trial, and the people sided with Magog. Magog's whole defense was, if you old school, Silver Age superheroes had just killed Joker, 100 times of capturing him ago, how many thousands of people would still be alive today? It's the whole concept of, if you could go back in time and if you could murder Hitler when he was a baby, before he'd ever sinned or done anything wrong, would you do it because you know that you would be saving the lives of countless thousands of innocent people if you just took out this one man? And so that's Magog's argument, and the people rejoice. They're like, yes. They're like, yeah, we are behind you 100%. This is the hero that we need for this day and age. We're tired of having to have our taxes, pay to, food and shelter and entertain these supervillains who are just going to ultimately break out and, murder more people. And so it was because he stood trial and he was found not guilty. That was really when Superman lost his faith, and he started to turn his back on humanity. And he's like, if this is really what you guys want, I'm not going to be a part of it, because he found value in every human life. He found inherent value in humans based on the fact that they were human, just like we should find inherent value in humans, because we are all image bearers of God. We have intrinsic inherent value as created beings of the Most High. And so we should really, really, really look at people as being valuable, even when we don't want to. And, I work my day job. I work in law enforcement, and it's so easy to start to look at people and stop seeing them as people, as human beings, and to stop having compassion for them and caring for them, especially when you're on the side of it that I am. And so, you know, the wrongs that they've done, you know, the other people that they've hurt, you know, the wicked things that they have been convicted of or admitted to having done. And you don't want to view them as people. You don't want to view them as being worth something, and you don't want to view them as redeemable. And yet that's what Superman looks at. He sees the potential in people, and so he doesn't believe in murder. You know, same with Batman, you know, to an extent. He didn't kill. That was his thing. He didn't kill. He might not necessarily, you know, stop you from dying if you're falling off a cliff, but he himself was not going to just out and out murder you. And that was one of the things that the Silver Age heroes, they really held humanity in high regard. And it was something that these new anti-heroes don't. You know, once they got to the point where they had scared, you know, all the normal human criminals into not doing that anymore because they were just, you know, oh, you robbed a bank, you're dead. Boom. You know, they just murdered it. You have all these crazy metahumans who consider themselves heroes, but they aren't. They're all above the law. You know, cops and military don't have the power to contain them or control them. And so they do what any kid with ADHD is going to do when he sits around and gets bored. They start just, you know, bouncing off the walls. They start fighting with each other. They start, you know, just destroying things with absolutely zero regard for the life that's around them. They don't protect humans anymore because they care about humans. They don't even see the humans when these metahumans are, and they're both sides are supposedly heroes and they're fighting each other, you know, and these buildings are collapsing and all these people are dying as, you know, collateral damage. They don't even acknowledge that. They don't even care. And that is the world.
They're basically acting like in the TV show The Boys. They're basically they're
Yes.
behaving in the same way. Like, you have superpowers, but you're gonna abuse them. You're gonna be a jerk anti-superhero. Like that's how they're behaving.
They abuse it. Yeah, they abuse the powers that they have or that they've been given. They don't show that they care, you know, or that they have any, you know, responsibility whatsoever. And so they just go around destroying because it's there to destroy, and they don't realize that they're as bad or worse than all the, you know, the criminals that they've stopped in the world. And so that is where we see Superman, you know, once he leaves his illusion and re-enters, you know, into society and Earth. That's what he's come back to. And so, you know, through the urging of Wonder Woman, who Wonder Woman is very much in this storyline. She's a warmonger, right? She's all about war. She's like, if I'd been stronger, if I'd killed Ares, if I'd done this, I would still have, you know, my queendom, I guess. And, you know, she would, you know, she's that little voice in Kal-El's ear, you know, saying, no, you got to be more extreme. No, she starts out, you know, saying, no, you need to give the humans something to hope for again. And she's progressively getting to the point where it's like, no, we have to arrest the metahumans. You know, we have to force them. And, you know, if they won't join us, if they're not for us, then they're against us. And so we have to throw them into jail. And the humility that you see in Superman, going to Orion, you know, to look for advice is amazing. Like Darkseid's son, like, you know, one of Superman's nemesis. He goes to his son to talk to him, and he doesn't really get the answer he's looking for. He kind of gets the same encouragement, you know, that kind of Wonder Woman's given him. And it's not what he wants to hear. It's not what he wants to do. He's really hoping to find a peaceful way to bring about change to the Earth until finally, you know, he's just like, you know what, there isn't going to be peace unless I force it. And in this art that you have up here, this, you know, amazing, you know, Alex Ross painting that you've got, something that is noteworthy is, you know, the S, the hope on his chest. It's not the red and yellow. It's not the iconic symbol. It's red on black. The background is now black. He's wearing, you know, black now. And that is meaningful and it's powerful. And of course, I want to give Alex Ross, the artist, I got to give him a shout out because he does all the art in this comic series, and he's just a phenomenal artist. He's done artwork for Marvel, DC, for everybody, and he is really amazing. And yeah, so that's where we're at in the second one. We're really starting to understand what motivated Superman to leave, to turn his back on humanity now. And he's having to come to grips with the fact that, okay, I'm going to show up, I'm going to do the right things for the right reason, and we're going to try and get all these unruly children back in order. But he's starting to see that some of them, no matter what he does, they're not going to follow him. And so he's starting down a path of force in the hopes and the goal of bringing peace.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think someone can make a TV show based on your explanation, because you covered every detail. That's like, if people would close their eyes and listen to you, they can imagine like a movie or a TV show in their heads. That was amazing. So now we're switching to the other half of this comic book, chapter 3. It starts with Superman's lion roar that is taken basically from Revelation again, and it's made to sound divine. At least that's the vision that Pastor Norman sees. Spectre tells Pastor Norman that he cannot see the future, but that only Pastor can foresee the road to, and now he uses the word Ragnarok, which is a way that Scandinavian theology, that Scandinavian mythologies see the end of the time, where basically this will be destruction of the gods. So now we're taken to Gulag, which is a historical World War II terminology, for imprisoning, Nazi imprisoning people. But Gulag is here presented as a super prison for criminal superhumans. Superman's hologram tells these inmates to choose right instead of wrong, but they respond that he robbed them of their own freedom fall. Very interesting. Superman responds that Justice League put all of them there not for punishment, but for education. Their argument is that they were performing sort of justice, kind of vengeance, but Superman responds that they adhere to a moral code based on the preservation of life. Now we're introduced to Captain Marvel, who seems to have joined Lex Luthor's MLF team. 5 galactic lords are watching everything. So they're like Spectre, but even I would say that these are cosmic. So we'll see a little bit, we'll see soon that Spectre has a human origins, but these are 5 galactic lords. So they're watching everything, including Shazam among them, who's pleading with the rest of them to help Captain Marvel and humankind, but the rest are done with people. Pastor admits that he never preached that God is a person, but a quote-unquote a force with many names. And this is the beginning of me being disappointed in this pastor, I have to say. Spectre is revealed to be a former cop, but now an angel of death and an avenging spirit. So we see something like this in the Old Testament, and God would use this angel of death. In the meantime, Lex Luthor's MLF team produces tons of steel soldiers, huge robots, to combat the Justice League. Batman reminds Luthor that their agenda is world order, not world dominion. Luthor puts a certain worm in Captain Marvel's ear, and he starts to act and speak differently. Some of the Superman's allies start to disagree with Superman over this Gulag prison. Pastor oversteps the invisible dimension, or a bubble that was keeping him unseen for anyone, where Spectre led him. And now Superman and the Justice League can suddenly see Pastor in the same space station where Superman is gathered with his Justice League friends. And that's like a comical situation with who are you? How did you come here? But he was observing them the whole time, just like John was observing everything happening in Revelation. So now Superman and Justice League team, they can see Pastor in their midst. But Pastor warns Superman of the coming judgment and quotes him prophetic message from the Bible. Superman doubts Pastor's words. So we also see this other aspect of Superman where he doesn't necessarily relate something of Messiah, of Jesus. So Superman doubts Pastor's words until Justice League comes and tells him that they found out that riot is happening in Gulag. Superman and Wonder Woman have different vision on how to stop the riot. So Superman is stubbornly persistent for peace. And this is where I start slowly disagreeing with him, because I mean, even in the Bible, God will give only so many chances for people to repent. But if evil is progressing to the point of even hurting other people, God will punish the evil. God will stop the evil. God doesn't have unmeasured unmeasured amount of grace. I mean, yeah, He is graceful, but if you're not repenting and not repenting and not repenting, in the meantime hurting people, God will stop that. So this is where I'm started being a little bit, not disappointed, but I'm like, dude, like for Superman, just it's your task also to punish people, because if they don't want to change, they don't want to change. If they want to hurt people, then it's up to you to stop them, because you have the power. So Superman and Wonder Woman have this discussion because they have different vision on how to stop the riot. Superman is for peace, and Diana tells others to use any means necessary. So Superman now starts seeing that Diana is actually undermining his authority. And I would say that here I start being on Diana's side, on the side of Wonder Woman, because what's enough, it's enough. Their meeting with the UN representatives doesn't go well, as they are done believing that Gulag can keep the prisoners peaceful. The UN people tell Superman that the hope he was once giving to people is promptly disappearing. Why? Well, because he keeps being stubbornly for peace and not actually punishing people, these superhumans. Lex Luthor orders Captain Marvel, who is again brainwashed because of that worm in his ear, to destroy Gulag so that the inmates can escape and cause chaos. So this will be the beginning of Ragnarok, right? When Captain Marvel rejects, Luthor touches his ear, where he preciously puts another worm inside and tells him to tumble down the walls of Jericho, another biblical parallel. Batman turns against Luthor and finds out that Captain Marvel is actually Billy Batson, who we know this in comic book and in movies. He's actually Shazam, but until he says Shazam and turns into Shazam, he's just a boy, Billy Batson. So Captain Marvel was actually the whole time Billy Batson. The Gulag riot is now getting worse, so Superman doesn't even know how to solve the problem because his peaceful ways aren't working anymore. Surprise, surprise. So now Diana steps in as the leader. Superman goes back to the Batcave to ask for help and tells Batman that he doesn't have time for his holier-than-thou. He actually uses those words, again, very biblical. He says, I don't have time for your holier-than-thou sayings. We need you. Superman reminds Batman that neither he nor Batman want human lives to perish, and almost begs him to intercede in the coming war. So now Batman is almost seen as a messiah because he's there to intercede between the two sides. Batman warns him of Captain Marvel, who's actually Billy, who is brainwashed by Luthor and who doesn't even know who he is. Billy turned into Shazam and is heading to Gulag to open its walls. Ragnarok is finally coming and Superman is trying to stop it. Shazam uses a lightning bolt to stop him, and this is actually at the beginning of the fighting scene between Shazam and Superman, and this is how Chapter 3 ends. Pastor Ben, any thoughts?
God, so many thoughts. So, yeah. So we see the progression, right? We've got the Gulag, which is like the Nazi internment camp. It's a re-education camp. It's intended to be more like maybe like purgatory, if that were even a real thing, where like you've done bad, but we're not gonna like get rid of you or throw you straight into prison. You're gonna live here, and once you come around to our side and see that we were right the whole time, and you've been rehabilitated, then you can come out and join us. It makes me think a lot of, even what we did in America, Native American re-education camps. They would take kids and they would, educate them in the ways of, being white and to, not be so pagan and heathen and all this kind of stuff, or when you look at like Angel Island during World War II and, the internment camps that we had on American soil, for Asians, and that they would be held there because they're like, well, we don't know if you're a spy or not. And so all incoming actual real immigrants, like Europeans came in through Ellis Island, right, in New York, but Asians came in through Angel Island off the coast out of California, and they were held there like it was an internment camp. Suspicion, like they were the enemy, and they were held there, and it took sometimes months and months and months for these immigrants to be approved, to come in, and living in terrible conditions. And so here we've got the same thing for metahumans, and of course they're fighting each other, and they're like, you've taken away our freedom. We're not free to do as we please. We're not free. We don't have a choice because you've put us here. And the little hologram thing, is like trying to be, like nice and say, no, you're here because, this is your second chance to do right. And so they start rioting. Everything's coming to a head, right? Like this whole place where the Gulag is at has been nuked, right? And so nobody can get there because of fallout anyway. And so they're inside this, Gulag, and they're trying to break out. They're trying to get free. They're done feeling, like they're being unjustly punished. And so Superman and Wonder Woman are are coming in, and they're trying to quell the riot. Wonder Woman encourages, this new assemblage of Justice League to do whatever it takes. They end up killing somebody. And now everybody that's there in Gulag looks at them and says, how can you say you're better than us? You just killed him. We killed people that we disagreed with. Now you're killing us. And how can you say you're right, but we were wrong? And so, Superman's having this huge moral dilemma, and he's like, Diana, we're not supposed to be killing. And she's like, you're too weak. We have to kill. This is why we're here. And yes. And so then you've got Shazam showing up. Like, I think everybody kind of knows that, kryptonite is Superman's weakness, but there's ways that Superman can work around kryptonite. The one thing that he is completely powerless against is magic, right? And if anybody who's watched this Shazam movie knows Captain Marvel, Shazam here, he is magic. It's wizards who gave him his power. Everything about him, and Black Adam and these other guys is that they are the avatars on Earth for these wizards, and they're 100% magic based. And so you put Shazam up against Supes is going to lose because he can't battle magic. He's an alien. He's technology, but he still functions within the realm of this universe, and physics and stuff apply to him. And so magic breaks all the rules. And so, yeah, Shazam shows up, and, he's like trying to get through to Billy, right? He's like talking to Billy. He's like, Billy, last time I saw you, you were just a kid. I didn't know this was you. You've got to remember me, and this kind of stuff. But Billy's got the worm in his head, right? Like Worm Tongue out of Tolkien, who's, turning, all of Rohan. And he's got, this thing controlling his mind and speaking evil, which is Lex Luthor speaking into him and making him be terrified and scared. And you just see Superman saying, don't say it, don't say it. Don't say the word, Billy. And then boom, it's Shazam, and Supes is just, he gets knocked back. And then, yeah, those two just start to go at it. And you're right, that's where that one ends. And it is the fight is on. And if the Gulag is going to fall, you're going to have all these ticked off metahumans, and they're just going to start destroying everything. It's worse than any nuclear blast that could have ever, leveled a city. And so that's why Superman is so much trying to contain what is about to happen. And it looks like everything is just going, to end terribly for Superman at this point.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to say that in this battle, Superman does not represent Jesus, and Shazam does not represent the devil, because with first, Shazam is not the bad guy. Second, Jesus will have no no problems defeating
Mhm.
Satan. If we read Revelation, we know that. So it's like, yeah, there's no obstacle, no problem for Jesus in general, not just with Satan, with anything or anyone. So now we're switching to chapter 4, which is the last chapter of the comic book. The war begins. Pastor Norman begs Spectre to stop it, but Spectre cannot interfere yet. He replies to the pastor by telling him to be prepared because a reckoning, he uses that word, a reckoning is coming. And then quotes him a verse about fearing God and giving him the glory because his judgment is coming. I love that segment. Captain Marvel, or Shazam, is still brainwashed and doesn't listen to Superman. And by not being able to control himself, he's being called or nicknamed a soldier of chaos because he's as strong, if not even stronger, than Superman. The UN prepares multi-megaton nuclear explosives to drop on the superheroes as the good and the bad guys fight. Batman and his crew join the battle. He and Wonder Woman destroy 2 out of 3 UN aircrafts, but one of the aircrafts manages to send the nuclear missile, down to their target. In the meantime, while the target is flying, while the missile is flying, Superman notices that it's coming, and Spectre tells the pastor that regardless if the bomb drops or not, a genocide is coming. And he's there to punish those responsible for evil because he's the angel of death. Spectre tells the pastor who shall be held accountable, and if humans or superhumans have sinned in this case. And now Pastor Norman is like, he's in a pickle. Who is he to decide? He's just a human. He doesn't like that he's put in such a stressful, responsible situation. So he says he cannot judge who is responsible. Is it humans or metahumans? Because whatever is his answer, then the judgment will come on the other side. So he says he cannot judge. So he starts lamenting Pastor Norman by saying that there is no evil there, just a tragedy. Superman still fights Shazam by holding his mouth closed so that he cannot continue saying Shazam, because then Superman has no way to fight him back. And while watching the missile coming, he admits to Shazam that he's helpless. Again, this is another way where Jesus and Superman are not similar at all. So he admits that he's helpless and that he had made many mistakes that led to this very point. He doesn't know what to do. This is where Superman is very vulnerable. He's being very honest with himself and with others. He's like, this was my fault. This all led because of my poor choices. So he's like, how should we stop the bomb? Should we even stop it or not? I don't know. So he's having dilemma and doubts even about himself. He says that the decision is not up to him because he's not a man and no God. And I love this because everyone would worship and idolize him throughout the ages where he was acting on earth and helping people. And then he tells Shazam, well, he's still holding his jaw, so he wouldn't say Shazam one more time. He says, but you, Shazam, you're both God, small g, and you're both men. So he tells him that he, Shazam, is more than anyone else who has ever existed, that he knows how is to live in both worlds, and that he can only weigh their worth equally. So now he can make a judgment. And here's where I was disappointed in Superman, because Superman forgot about Jesus, because supposedly Shazam is the only one in the history of the world who lived on the both sides and shared both natures of God and man, and he's the one who is only capable of making that decision. So I was like, seriously, what about Jesus, who came before Shazam? So Shazam finally understands. You can see he starts to change. His brainwashing is slowly fading away. He's like, hey, I should be a good guy. I should be helping people. Why am I fighting against my friend Superman? So he finally starting to understanding and coming to his senses, and then he utters the word Shazam that prophetically brings 7 thunders from Revelation chapter 10. He prevents, and now Superman is flying towards the missile to prevent it, to sacrifice himself one more time. But Shazam is getting faster, and he prevents Superman from stopping the nuclear missile. He pulls Superman down to the earth, and then he does that himself. But the bomb still explodes in the air and kills most of the superhumans, these metahumans. Superman is extremely angry and rushes to the UN to hurt the world leaders. You can see that Superman is not himself. He's now, all these decades, he was like, peace, 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 peace. Now he's like, I don't care, I'm going to kill them all because they killed all these, metahumans, including Shazam. At least that's what Superman thinks. Since the judgment has been passed, Spectre is about to leave because his mission is done. But Pastor Norman gets upset now with Spectre and asks him to tell him to rather rush to the UN and prevent that doomsday evil will happen. So he's like, well, if this is just a vision and it didn't happen yet, please go to the UN and tell them not to even send the missiles. And if he doesn't, if the Spectre doesn't go and warn the UN people, then Pastor tells Spectre then that will be actually be evil. So Pastor is now transferring the blame from metahumans who act foolishly in an evil way to Spectre, the angel of the dead. Imagine, Pastor Ben, if any prophet of God in the Old Testament will go and tell to the angel of God who came to bring punishment and doomsday, actually, you're the bad guy if you don't go and stop, but you actually kill the people. Imagine that audacity. So I'm like, first, I don't know if you can put that blame because he's just doing his job as punishing the evildoers. He's not, Spectre is not here to commit evil. So you cannot actually blame him. And here we see actually from this point to the end of the comic book, we see slowly but surely elevation of the human nature above that of not just superhuman, but also divine nature. That's another thing that starts bugging me in the comic book. And again, that's why I said I don't give all 5 stars to the comic book, but 4.5, which is still great. So after Pastor is actually chastising, Spectre and say, hey, go warn these people, and if not, you'll be the one actually doing the evil. Now the UN people witnessed Superman's wrath and said that it would even make Satan tremble. This is actually written in the comic book. Superman is getting so mad, so angry that there's actually a cloud of text saying that even Satan, if he would be present there as the object of Superman's wrath, he will be even the one trembling. And in this case, they're portraying in Revelation when Jesus is coming to destroy his opponents. But unlike Jesus, Superman is furious and about to kill his persecutors, which we see in the New Testament that Jesus does not do that. A couple more paragraphs. The pastor is now taken to the UN palace and tries to talk to Superman and calms him down by telling him that Superman is actually mad at himself, not at people, and that he actually blames himself for everything bad happening in previous years. Pastor is here almost like a psychiatrist. He gives this humanistic speech and not a sermon by telling Superman to forgive himself. Again, we see here rising of the humanistic and superhuman, it's like, worth and abilities compared to these so-called godly, basically the author here is trying to say, we don't need anyone divine, we don't need gods, we can just make right judgment and correct the wrong by ourselves. This is the message that I was getting in this last chapter 4. Pastor then tells Superman that the minute Superman made the super aspect of himself more important than the man, the day he decided to turn his back on mankind, that completely cost him his instinct. So again, we see here elevation of the human nature above the super or the divine nature, which is wrong, because if we would of course compare this to Jesus, we should never elevate Jesus' nature above his divine nature. So supposedly because Superman was too super and less of a human, that took his judgment away, which is actually weird because it's actually vice versa. It's the opposite. It's his super nature that is judging righteously and giving this grace to people when they're committing evil, not to punish them immediately. And because it was his human side that always helped him judge rightly all these years, Pastor now tells Superman that his redemption lies in the next decision he makes. So this is like making right wrong by your own decisions and acts. Again, contrary to the gospel, because you cannot do that. If you're sinful, you're sinful regardless of how much you do good. You cannot buy yourself. You cannot buy salvation or redemption. So that Superman is supposed to make this decision not as not as God with small g God, but as a man, just like all of us. Hey, you know what to make. You know how to make the right decision and to make them in a proper way. And again, this is a very pro-humanistic speech or a sermon that has instead of being more biblical. Basically, take care of yourself, judge right, judge well, atone for your own sins. You don't need Jesus as the Messiah because you can fix yourself. You can fix your fallen human nature. And this is where I was also disappointed with Pastor. Superman now finds that there are a number of survivors because Captain Marvel or Shazam managed to detonate the bomb high above the ground zero. Among these good guys, there are also bad guys who survived. So Superman and Justice League are left with the same dilemma. What to do with all these people? They don't want to imprison them again. Plus, Gulag is destroyed. Superman admits that neither him nor other superhumans are gods. And this is good. Humility has to come. So he invites everyone to solve the problem together, quote unquote, not by ruling above you, but by living among you. So again, we see this not anymore Superman's nature and attributes elevated, but he's put to the same level as other people, which is good because he's no Messiah. Superman promises not to impose his and their power on humanity anymore. Superman didn't choose humans nor superhumans, but he chose a life. The last paragraph, now the comic book is finally ending. As Batman patrols the hospital, checking on the patients, Lex Luthor is alive and imprisoned. Wonder Woman is accepted back in her realm. In the UN, a quote, "The gods have chosen to work with mankind towards a common good." This angel or spectre is observing everything with a passer as usual and says that there is no more need for any further tragedies and sufferings. Pastor Norman is found because Revelation is supposedly unraveled and happened, prophecies happen, doomsday happen. It's like back to the next chapter. But guess what? There is no Messiah coming here. It turns out like a very humanistic end of the chapter. Like, well, again, we don't need any Messiah. We can deal with these problems. Now, Pastor Norman is found alone when Spectre or the angel abandons him. He's found alone in the church as if everything was merely a vision, which was not, but that's how it seems like in the comic book. Sunday comes, he's preaching another sermon to the congregation, and he says that a dream is not always a prophecy, meaning what he saw with Spectre does not necessarily have to happen or unravel everything in the same fashion in the future. And he says future is open to interpretation. Superman and Wonder Woman are found to be expecting a baby, something that may resemble silly Dan Brown's novel, The Da Vinci Code. The Gospel of Philip suggests a special relationship between Jesus and Mary Magdalene, but these texts are not considered reliable historical sources. So if the author of the text is trying to portray this romantic relationship between Superman and Wonder Woman as something that supposedly Jesus had with Mary Magdalene, is basically garbage. There's also this so-called Gospel of Jesus' Wife, which is a modern forgery and is completely fake so-called gospel that suggests Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene. This is my addition. This is not mentioned in the comic book, but because it is mentioned that Superman is expecting baby with Wonder Woman, I just had to explain that this is merely, if supposedly comparing Jesus and Mary Magdalene, it's merely a speculation and nonsense. And this is the assessment, actually the end of the assessment of this phenomenal comic book, Kingdom Come, where we agreed with so many things, we disagreed also with some things, and that is normal. So here again, we see Superman portraying Jesus' characteristics in a certain degree, but then in the last chapter, I, at least Pastor Ben, I felt both disappointed by Superman and well, not completely with Superman, but to a certain degree, but also with Pastor Norman, who is beginning to sound very like pro-humanistic preacher instead of like being called to exegete the biblical passages in how they're actually written in the proper context instead of just, elevating the human side above God's. What would be your understanding of this last chapter?
So to understand how it gets to this point, you have to understand where the author was coming from before he really fleshed out Kingdom Come. So what's really cool is he was pitching ideas. The author hadn't really made it big time yet. He was pitching ideas about different superhero stories, trying to see, if there was something that DC, was interested in that they wanted to pick up. And so his final idea, and the one that they kind of latched onto, was the idea of, instead of looking at superheroes as protecting and furthering mankind, in our evolution, what if, because there were superheroes that rose up, it stunted humankind? What if humankind didn't progress as a species because they couldn't? A new apex, predator was there, and so humanity just stopped at a certain level. And let's take that view of superhumans. So that's where he's coming from with the whole thing. The whole idea that humanity couldn't progress because superhumans or metahumans were there stopping them. And so ultimately he had to bring that point home in this final chapter. Talking about the pastor in this book, as disappointed, as a evangelical, born again Christian, I see too many pastors that actually are like this pastor in the comic, where they don't teach that God is even a being. They don't teach that there is a personal God. They teach a gospel of pseudo psychiatry, health and wellness. You can pull yourself up by the bootstraps and make it in life. And it's interesting because, when you were talking about in the last chapter, the pastor there says, I've never taught that God was a person. And, we now see, like Ragnarok, taken from like Scandinavian, mythology and folklore. And we see a lot of other, religions coming into it. And so the concept of looking at God as not being an individual being, there not being any personhood to God, is literally the exact same tactic that LaVeyan Satanists take towards the devil. They teach, the teachings of Anton Szandor LaVey to try and get people to agree with Satanism. They teach that the devil isn't actually a persona. It's not a individual being, but that it is just a force or an energy. It's just a negativity, and that as such, really it's bringing balance to the whole, and that Satan wasn't an individual, Elohim. It wasn't like a fall from heaven or anything. That Satan like that doesn't even really exist. And so now you see the flip side, and this accurately represents, I think, a lot of pastors in this, post-Christian kind of, world that first world countries are moving towards, that God isn't really a personal divine being, and he doesn't really care for you. He is the universe. He is the vibe. He is the flow. God is the energy, like the force from Star Wars that just kind of, binds us all together. And because he's in everything and everything's in him, that we're all really kind of one with God. And that if we can find the God in ourselves, then that's really our greatest goal, and all this kind of stuff. And so it is a humanist perspective that's coming forward, moving towards this. And so that's why we get the ending that we get, that Superman has had to come to the realization that metahumans as a whole were not helping progress humanity, that they were stifling it. And so humanity doesn't need them as metahumans to rule and to judge or to protect or anything else. They can really just take a back seat and allow humanity to just grow and flourish, on its own, bring, humans to the table. We can make our own decisions. We don't need you little g gods watching over us anymore. We can do this ourselves. If we want to build a tower to heaven, we're going to do it, kind of mentality. And so, yes, that's where a lot of the parallels and similarities, from the Superman mythos compared to, the Jesus savior, kind of comparison really fall apart. Because at the end of this, it is the fact that Superman looks at Shazam and says, you are both God and man, because he's now dealing with magic, not science or technology or whatever. And so he's equating magic with, godhood, but little g God. And so really what you see in Shazam, you've got another demigod, just like, Hercules or Thor or, Persephone or all these other demigods that are in these comic books. And so he says, what it is to be human. You were born a human, you lived as a human, and I think in this, Superman is really identifying with his being an alien. He doesn't want to be called Clark anymore. He feels like his humanity died when Lois died. And so he now identifies as an alien. He's not identifying as a human anymore. Whereas Jesus was fully God and fully man. The hypostatic union, right? Like he was both all at once. And so there was somebody who was actually fully God and fully man. And it wasn't Billy Batson, it was Jesus. But I don't fault the author or the comic for that, because they are portraying their views of religion. They are portraying their views of salvation and redemption and judgment. And so I don't require or expect that to line up with a biblical worldview, because the author of this didn't have a biblical worldview coming into it. But I do like that they pulled in so much of the Bible. I do like the character of Spectre as like an avenging angel type, character in this, which you can, Spectre's kind of, I don't think he's ever even had his own comic book, but he's shown up, in different places, and he's not a god, but he is, kind of like the Silver Surfer is a herald for Galactus. Spectre is, like a being that is sent out by a more godlike being in the DC universe to pass judgment. And so I like what they did and how they incorporated what they incorporated. But yeah, here in the end, it is humanism that's pushed. Any kind of gospel message completely falls apart, and it's left to humans to best judge what is right and what is wrong. And for what it leaves you with, the message it leaves you with is no God can judge us. We should only be allowed to judge ourselves. And so, yeah, up to that point, you're kind of like, wow, this, oh, wait, wow, that, moral dilemmas, like, oh, this is so cool. It's like this, and there's fighting and there's action and it's everything you want it to be. But then the narrative, the subcontext that really gets pushed to the front at the end and becomes the main context of everything is kind of like, well, that's a letdown. I see how they got there, but it isn't as good as it could have been.
Yeah, I agree that the ending, at least for me and you, like as for Men of Fate, was a little bit disappointing, because again it elevates the human side and puts down the divine. Not that I would see Superman or Shazam as divine, but they would represent gods with small g. So uh, nonetheless, the rest of the comic was excellent. I would still recommend, as Pastor Ben was saying, Alex Truss, as you can see in the background, he's drawing amazingly. He's doing this old-fashioned comic book drawing that you can see like back in the old comics. That will be like, I think that will be the golden age or the golden era of
Mhm.
comic books, with artists that used to draw like this more often than nowadays. So yeah, again, I would recommend the comic book. I would also uh, encourage people, if you're a nerd and if you like comic books, video games, movies, TV shows, don't feel embarrassed of that. Don't feel shy, but just know that behind every game, every comic book character, every video game character, every story, every plot in books, in novels, in TV shows, there's um there's always a spiritual background about God, about Satan, about demons, about angels, about the good guys, about the bad guys, about how the world came to be, about who's the ruling, who's the ruler of the universe, about so many things. There's always there's even in authors, I found this, that are not Christians at all, but they know biblical terminology, they know biblical passages. So many times in the movies and TV shows that I would watch, there's intentional usage of biblical imagery and passages, sometimes to bring the message to the point, but sometimes to even mock it and reverse it. So I just want to encourage people, continue being nerds. If you're a nerd like me or Pastor Ben, with anything, any hobby you have, but just be encouraged to whatever you're reading or playing or listening or watching, to know that there's a deep spiritual and theological message behind all of those characters, all of these worldview buildings, all of these forces and spirits and gods, whatever you want to call them, heroes. And if you do yourself a favor to analyze them and compare with the Bible, you first would know more about the Bible, but second, you would also know about the world building of this, fantasy or fictional world that you're playing or watching or listening. And it can be a great starter with your nerdy friends who are not Christians. And you can say, "Oh yeah, by the way, did you know that Jesus and Superman have so many parallels?" And they're like, "Yeah," and you're like, "Yeah," and you can mention like 10 of those, and then you can also draw the differences and point people to Jesus. That would be actually a cool way to evangelize, that would not be forcing anyone to convert and like, listen, you're a sinner. You can actually start by using something cool as comic books, and you can also share our material with everyone. This will be my concluding part. I just have to say that I'm going on vacation very soon, so until the next live episode will be August 10, Sunday, where I'm welcoming back archaeologist Dr. David E. Graves, and we'll be talking about Pontius Pilate and stuff like that. In the meantime, we have prepared many episodes for Fridays and Sundays. They are pre-recorded. I need one more, and then they are uploaded, but at certain dates will become available publicly. So in those episodes, you cannot go on the live chat and ask questions, but you can still watch them, because even though they're pre-recorded, they'll be available for all of you every Friday and Sunday until I'm back from vacation. That being said, please continue loving us, praying for us, subscribing and liking, sharing our material with everyone else. Numbers have been going so much down, and I've been pretty discouraged. So any like and subscribe, or even kind comment, means the whole world to me. Pastor Ben, any concluding thoughts?
Just that I agree with you, let your geek flag fly. I tell people that all the time. If God didn't want us to be creative and imaginative, he wouldn't have put that in us. And so it's nothing to be ashamed of or be embarrassed about. Like, if you enjoy geek culture, man, just own it and enjoy it, and understand that most, if not all of it, doesn't line up 100% with our faith. In fact, most of it doesn't line up 99% with our faith. But you look for those golden nuggets of truth where you can find them, and you can absolutely use that as a way to share the love and hope of Jesus with the people around you and in your circles. And then I'll just kind of leave with this as far as DC comics are concerned. I was not much of a DC guy growing up. I read Batman, and that was about it. In DC, I was much more into Marvel. I have tried to read some of the new 52 DC stuff, even here recently, and I have yet to find a title or a storyline that I've read that didn't make me feel like I just completely wasted my time. So new 52, boo. Old stuff, good.
Pastor Ben, thank you so much for your time. I'm sorry we went for almost 2.5 hours. I honestly thought we can finish in an hour and, I don't know, 50, maybe 2 hours. But thank you so much for your patience. No, that's fine. It was really a good episode. And yeah, again, Pastor Ben and I several months ago covered the episode on Silver Surfer theology. Welcome. Feel free and welcome to enjoy that episode and share with others. Again, I'll see you live in about a month, but in the meantime, many pre-recorded episodes will be coming your way so that you will not feel abandoned. Okay, before I end, I just had to share this.
Yeah, that's awesome.
This post, because this is a new person on our channel. I just want to say welcome. He said that new Superman movie is so good it reminds me of the Christian walk. See, I didn't see it yet, so maybe on my vacation when I have more time and I can dedicate. I'm also waiting for Fantastic Four and finally to see Galactus. I'm like, dude, Galactus has been needing his own movie for a long time. Like, I'm excited about that. And honestly, when I was reading this book, this comic book, Pastor Ben, I love the character of Hawkman and how he was drawn. I was like, man, he deserves his own movie, because when you talk about Justice League, no one talks about Hawkman. He's like, put that on the side. But I'm like, man, he looks so cool, like a flying cryptid, honestly.
Yeah, definitely.
No, seriously. So I'm like, man, he deserves his own movie. Yeah, I just want to say God bless you, brother, for putting that comment just before we ended with this episode going live. If you're new, please like and subscribe. That will mean a lot to me. May God bless you. We'll go live again August 10 when I'm back from vacation, but in the meantime, many episodes will be coming pre-recorded. So if it's on your heart, bless us and like and subscribe. That being said, because I won't be able to talk live to any of you for a while, please be encouraging your walk with God. Please remember that archaeology, science, nerdy things, supernatural things, you can use anything in your walk with God. Don't be scared of that. Analyze everything biblically. Use everything with solid discernment and judgment, and you can use all these different tools to spread the gospel, to defend the faith, be a little apologist, and just just open your mind to different things and not be scared of what's happening out there. You see this source, how is this affecting my faith? This source, what about multiverse? What about evolution? We cover all of these topics and many more on the channel. But even if we wouldn't, I just want to encourage you, despite of your weakness, despite of your sin, despite of your questions, despite of your doubts, run back to Jesus. Just like in the comic book, people will see Superman, and when he would levitate and fly in the sky, they will see him as hope. They're like, oh man, like the new hope is rising in their hearts. So imagine how much even more Jesus should be a capital H hope for all of us, that never abandons us, never forgets about us, regardless of our sins and iniquities and wrestles and questions and doubts that we have. So be encouraged. God loves you. Run to him regardless of your failures, and remember that those self-condemning thoughts that you're having in your mind, how you're worthless or not good enough, none of us is. Run to God. Remember who's the author and perfecter of your faith. Be blessed and encouraged. Pastor Ben, thank you, and thank you everyone in the chat. See you.